sequestration, which I agree needs to be done. I don't agree that this amendment puts us on a path to do it. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Virginia is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I yield the remainder of my time to my friend and colleague, the Chairman of the Budget Committee, Mr. Ryan.
Gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized for the remainder of the time.
How much time is that?
Gentleman has 3 minutes.
All right, that's plenty. Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chairman, we passed a budget. We showed what we would do to deal with all these fiscal problems and fiscal priorities. We showed defense spending decreases off of the defense request from last year. We showed a responsible way to get savings from the Pentagon budget. To my friends on the other side of the aisle, to their credit, they brought a budget to the floor that turned off the sequester and showed alternative savings as well. The Senate, nothing. No budget for 3 years. The President, he tells us he doesn't want the sequester to kick in, that it's a bad thing to happen, but he's not doing anything to show how he will prevent the sequester from happening. 2 weeks ago, we passed a reconciliation bill. That bill said specifically how we will cut spending in other areas of government to prevent this sequester from occurring next year, 1 year. The ranking member of the Budget Committee, Mr. Van Hollen, authored an amendment to do the same thing. Other savings to pay for 1 year of the sequester set aside. So both the House Republicans and the Democrats in the House proposed the same kind of solution, 1 year set aside. Let's just look at what people are saying about what the sequester will do to our national defense. The President, in his own budget, says that the sequester would inflict great damage to the country's national security. The Secretary of Defense says it would hollow out our defense. The Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff says that sequestration would pose unacceptable risk to the nation's security. The Chief of Naval Operations says that the sequester would have a severe and irreversible impact on the Navy's future. The Chief of Staff of the Army says that he is deathly afraid of what would happen to our military if this takes place. All this amendment does is it gives us one more avenue and opportunity to take the spending cuts we've already articulated and to put them in place to prevent the sequester from happening, from seeing all these bad things take place. It gives another opportunity within this conference report, when that arrives, to prevent the sequester from happening by swapping those cuts out with other savings elsewhere in the budget. Our government's projected to spend about $45 trillion over the next 10 years. This is a trillion, so the math that the gentleman from Washington mentioned doesn't quite add up. But if we start dropping defense 10% in January, that is going to have a destabilizing effect on our national security. There is plenty of other government spending that's being wasted that can be cut to pay for this. 61% of the federal government has been on autopilot, off limits, has not been touched since 2006. There is plenty of areas that we can get savings from, like this amendment proposes to. Let's get it from there, and let's not put our men and women at risk who are putting on the uniform and serving us and fighting for our country.
Gentleman from Washington is recognized.
How much time do I have left?
Gentleman has 2 minutes.
2 minutes. I yield myself 1 minute.
Gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
I agree with a lot of what the gentleman said. For instance, he's right that we have to look at that other 61% of the budget. He is, however, wrong that it hasn't been touched since 2006. We Democrats touched it and reduced Medicare by $500 billion. And you Republicans beat us up, shall we say, over the fact that we had done that. So to stand up, I cannot yield. It's my time. Don't have enough time. So, you know, there's a considerable amount of hypocrisy here. We want to avoid sequestration without question, but to not allow for any revenue, which again is what this amendment does, just cuts, protecting defense, not protecting anything else, allowing for no revenue, despite the fact that revenue has gone down by almost 30% over the course of the last 10 years, puts us on the path to sequestration. That's a path I don't want to be on. But we have to be broader in our thinking about it, other than just devastating every other portion of the budget as the approach. Protect defense, no revenue. That's not a solution to sequestration. With that, I yield the last minute to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Nadler.
Gentleman from New York is recognized for the remaining 1 minute.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Speaker, there is hypocrisy here, and there is also a great faith and ignorance on the part of the public. We have, in this defense budget, it's $8.3 billion above what was agreed to in the Budget Control Act last year. And now he says that's not enough. Under the Ryan budget, the entire discretionary expenditures of the United States will go down eventually to 3.5% of GDP from 12.5%. And since Governor Romney says defense should not go below 4%, that means minus 0.5% for everything else government does. Less than zero for the post office, for transportation, for education, for the Weather Bureau, for NASA, for everything government does other than Social Security, Medicare, and veterans and debt service, $0. That's where this budget that the other side of the aisle is espousing and is voted for to a person leads us to $0 for all government functions other than defense and veterans.
All time having expired and been yielded back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Virginia. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to.
Chairman, ask for a recorded vote.
Washington seeks a recorded vote pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18. Further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Virginia will be postponed. It is now in order to consider amendment number 39, printed in House Report 112-485. For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk made in order under the rule.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 39, printed in House Report number 112-485, offered by Mr. Gingrey of Georgia.
Pursuant to House Resolution 661, the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Gingrey, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise tonight to urge my colleagues to support my non-binding amendment, number 39, which would express the sense of Congress that active duty military personnel who live in or are stationed in Washington, D.C. should be exempt from existing District of Columbia firearm restrictions. Mr. Chairman, it is no secret that the District of Columbia has historically had some of the most restrictive firearm regulations in the nation. In fact, in June of 2008, the Supreme Court, in the District of Columbia versus Heller case, ruled that the district's handgun ban and requirements that rifles and shotguns in the home be kept unloaded and disassembled or outfitted with a trigger lock is unconstitutional. In that decision, it also said that the Second Amendment is applicable to an individual, not just a militia. Well, just 1 month later, the District of Columbia enacted the Firearms Control Emergency Amendment Act of 2008, which places onerous restrictions on the ability of law-abiding citizens to possess firearms, thus violating the spirit, if not the letter, by which the Supreme Court of the United States ruled in D.C. versus Heller. Mr. Chairman, there are approximately 40,000 servicemen and women across all branches of the armed forces. They either live in or they're stationed on active duty within Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. Indeed, many of them are stationed at the Pentagon. Unless these individuals are granted a waiver as serving in a law enforcement role, they are subject to the District of Columbia's onerous and highly restrictive laws on the possession of firearms. Mr. Chairman, there are servicemen and women who have been prosecuted because of this unconstitutional prohibition, despite their training in the use of firearms. This is a travesty. Studies have clearly shown that firearms are a crime deterrent. The de facto handgun ban leaves law-abiding citizens unable to protect themselves from violent acts or individuals breaking the law. So this amendment recognizes that the D.C. handgun law, especially in regard to trained servicemen and women, punishes individuals well-equipped to protect themselves and others while emboldening perpetrators of violent crime. Mr. Chairman, if we trust these brave men and women to defend our country, why do we not trust them to legally exercise their Second Amendment rights? I'd like to note that the NRA is supportive of my amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. What purpose does the gentlelady rise?
I rise to claim the time in opposition.
The gentlelady is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in strong opposition to Amendment number 39. The amendment reflects a pattern by Republicans in the 112th Congress of singling out the District of Columbia for unique treatment and outright bullying. There is no federal law that exempts active military personnel in their personal capacities from otherwise applicable federal firearms laws, except with respect to residency requirements or from any state or local firearms laws. Yet the amendment expresses the sense of Congress that active duty personnel in their personal capacities should be exempt from gun laws only in one jurisdiction, the District of Columbia. If the gentleman on the other side who sponsored this amendment believes that active duty personnel should be exempt from federal, state, or local firearms laws, why did he not offer an amendment that would apply nationwide? Perhaps he did not offer such an amendment for the same reason that the Republican sponsor of H.R. 3808 to ban abortions for 20 weeks only in the District of Columbia, on which the House Judiciary Committee on the Constitution held a hearing today, did not introduce that same 20-week bill to apply nationwide. Or perhaps Republicans pick on the district because they think they can. The proponent of this amendment, as well as the D.C. gun bill, which would eliminate D.C.'s gun laws, live in the past, acting as if the changes the district has made in its gun laws after the Supreme Court held a decision in 2008 had not happened, and as if a federal district court and a federal appeals court had not already upheld the constitutionality of the district's new gun laws. They act as if the Supreme Court's McDonald decision in 2010 had never occurred. In McDonald, the court said that the Second Amendment does not confer, quote, the right to keep and carry any weapon whatsoever in any manner whatsoever and for whatever purpose, end quote. This amendment represents the third attack by this Congress on the district's government gun safety laws. Although the amendment is non-binding, we will fight every attack on our rights as a local government, particularly when we are singled out for unequal treatment. This amendment does nothing less than attempt to pave the way for actual inroads into the district's new gun safety laws. Republicans have been trying this week to use the District of Columbia to move issues they dare not propose for the nation at large, instead of focusing on jobs. And our allies, our city, and I have spent the week fighting back equally hard. The majority can expect a fierce fight from us whenever a bill degrades our citizens and treats them in any way as second-class citizens as this bill proposes to do this very evening. And I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlelady reserves. Gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask how much time I have remaining?
Gentleman from Georgia has 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I remind the gentlewoman from the District of Columbia that first and foremost, this is a sense of Congress resolution, non-binding resolution. It's not to be, in my opinion, Mr. Chairman, to be confused with any other ban or amendment that she referenced. It's certainly not to be confused with H.R. 645, a bill that would eliminate D.C.'s gun safety laws, which she was so concerned about in the last couple of years. This is just simply saying very clearly, Mr. Chairman, and especially to the governing body, the City Council and Mayor of the District of Columbia, look, we want to help you. We are recommending that you take this action. We're not forcing you to do this. This is, again, as I say, a non-binding resolution. It is just the sense of Congress, which, after all, has jurisdiction over the District of Columbia. We want to say to the governing body, we think it's a darn good idea for you to enact this waiver for these military men and women, 40,000 of them, as I say, stationed either in D.C., at the Pentagon, at Fort Myers, and Virginia, Maryland, that have the ability, the training, the necessary judgment and mentality to actually help the 500,000 residents of the District of Columbia. I mean, I don't think that my colleague and any colleagues on the other side of the aisle who might be in opposition to this, I think that opposition is misguided. They're missing an opportunity to support something that would be good, indeed good for the safety of the people of the District of Columbia. If we criminalize the possession of firearms, then it might be a trite and hackneyed expression, but only criminals then would have the right to bear arms. Now, this bill that the District of Columbia passed in the aftermath of the Supreme Court decision, Heller versus District of Columbia, that upheld the Second Amendment rights for individuals and said that what law existed in the District of Columbia was unconstitutional. So they come up with some arcane, very difficult, almost impossible rules and regulations in regard to the possession of firearms so that they de facto make it impossible. So I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle support this amendment, sense of Congress, non-binding, and I yield back my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentlelady from the District of Columbia is recognized.
How much time?
The gentlelady has 45 seconds.
Mr. Speaker, if this is such a benign amendment meant for the good of the District of Columbia, I can't imagine why the gentleman hasn't offered it for the nation at large. Why help us when we haven't asked for your help? Why not help everybody? You don't help. Why not help people in Virginia? More of the members of our armed services pass through Virginia than pass through the District of Columbia. You don't want to help us. Nobody on that side has helped us this year. If you want to help us, come ask me first, and I'll tell you what kind of help we need. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. All time having been yielded back or expired. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Georgia. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Chair understands that Amendment 41 will not be offered. Okay. It is now in order to consider Amendment number 42, printed in House Report 112-485. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 42, printed in House Report number 112-485, offered by Ms. Lee of California.
Pursuant to House Resolution 661, the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Lee, and a member opposed each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My amendment today is very straightforward. It would limit the Department of Defense funding to the amount authorized under the Budget Control Act of 2011. This would result in an $8 billion reduction in spending from the level authorized by the House Armed Services Committee. The amendment is co-sponsored by my colleagues, Representatives Paul, Woolsey, Stark, Blumenauer, Schrader, and Frank, ranking member of the House Financial Services Committee and a longtime advocate for reasonable defense spending reforms. As you know, Mr. Chair, last year Congress passed the Budget Control Act, which put in place spending caps on discretionary spending. Despite these statutory limitations, the House Armed Services Committee set overall military spending billions of dollars above what the Pentagon requested or what was agreed to under the Budget Control Act. While many of us did not support the discretionary caps under the Budget Control Act, our amendment simply brings Pentagon spending in line with the law. It does this while protecting our active duty military personnel and retirees. Let me repeat, not a single penny would come from active duty and National Guard personnel accounts or from the Defense Health Program. The Pentagon budget already consumes almost 50 cents out of every discretionary dollar that we spend, and adding billions of unrequested dollars at the expense of struggling families during the ongoing economic downturn is just downright wrong. So I ask my colleagues, if we are really concerned with the deficit, then vote for this amendment. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentlelady reserves. For all purposes, gentleman from California seek recognition.
Mr. Chairman, I rise to claim the time in opposition to the amendment.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I yield myself 1.5 minutes.
Gentleman is recognized.
This is a very clear opportunity to see the difference of the two sides of the aisle, how they feel about supporting the defense of our nation. You know, we have taken, with the Deficit Reduction Act, half of the savings has come out of defense. Less than 19% of the budget goes for defense, but half of the savings. So if we had a big pie and we had 19% of the spending comes out of defense, but then when we take the savings, we're taking half out of defense. You know, Mr. Chairman, if we continue to try to solve our deficit problem on the backs of our military, our troops, who's going to have our backs the next time we're attacked? Over my lifetime, we have cut back the military after every war. This is the first time I've seen us cut back during the war. We have troops right now going outside the wire, and when they get back to camp, they watch Fox News. I've been there. I've seen it. And they find out what's going on, and they listen to this debate, and they feel that there are some that don't have their backs. Well, it's not this side of the aisle. Mr. Chairman, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Reclaiming 30 seconds of my time.
Gentlelady is recognized.
I just want to respond to the gentleman and just say that's further from the truth what he just said. First of all, our active duty troops in the field are covered by the Overseas Contingency Operation Funds. Secondly, the Pentagon did not ask for this money. I'd like to yield 1 minute to the gentlelady from California, Ms. Woolsey.
The gentlelady from California is recognized for 1 minute.
I want to thank the gentlelady from California for bringing this amendment forward. Mr. Chairman, I rise in strong support of this amendment, and I'm proud to be a co-sponsor and to show the difference between both sides of the aisle. Because with all of the fiscal challenges that we face, it's just common sense that the most generously funded government agency, the Department of Defense, would tighten its belt just like everyone else. Sure, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are happy to cut and be big budget cutters when it comes to food stamps and Medicare and the safety net and anti-poverty programs. But when it comes to war and when it comes to weapons, they actually are the biggest spenders of all. I think the bare minimum we can ask is to keep the DOD budget at the level agreed to last year when we passed the Budget Control Act. The majority is asking poor children, seniors, and women.
Fired.
Another 10 seconds.
Gentlelady is recognized for 10 seconds.
The majority is asking poor children, seniors, and women's health needs to make do with less. The same must apply to the Pentagon. Vote yes on the Lee Frank amendment. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from California.
Mr. Chairman, I just note that the President increased over $4.5 billion over the Deficit Reduction Act, and we went $3.7 billion more than the President to protect TRICARE and some of the other things for the troops. I yield at this time the Chairman of the Budget Committee, gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Ryan, 2 minutes.
The gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized for 2 minutes.
I think the Chairman from yielding. Look, as the gentleman said, the President didn't ask for this amount of money. He asked for more money. Fiscal year 2012, $554 billion. The pre-sequester cap, $546 billion. The President's request, $551 billion. Our budget resolution was $554. This bill, the base bill, $548. The gentlelady's amendment, $539.7. The gentlelady's amendment is cutting defense below the BCA caps, below the President's request. And to the other gentlelady who talked from California, all these programs she mentioned are increasing. And the attempts that have been made by the majority were to slow the rate of increase. This is being cut. Real reductions in this category of spending when all the other domestic spending is increasing, hopefully at a slightly slower pace. So let's mind ourselves that this is the first priority of the federal government. We are in war right now. The President himself in his budget is saying that we have to be higher for the safety and the security of our troops. And if the gentlelady's amendment passes, which actually brings it down below the BCA levels, then she's giving all the discretion to the executive branch, to the President to decide how to allocate those dollars, ceding the power of the purse from the legislative branch to the executive branch, which is clearly not in our interest as guardians of the elected branch, the legislative branch of Congress. With that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlelady from California is recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Let me just say, first of all, sometimes we respectfully disagree with the President, and I think that this $8 billion in cut to bring us back to the Budget Control Act of 2011 is, given the very difficult times we're faced with now and the fact that of all the government agencies, the Pentagon has benefited the most from generous funding. We've got plenty of outdated and unnecessary Cold War era weapon systems that can and should be canceled. I think this is a reasonable amendment. I'd like to yield now 1 minute to the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Schrader.
Gentleman from Colorado is recognized for 1 minute. Oregon.
Sorry. Thank you. Barely 10 months ago, we passed a bipartisan Budget Control Act to forestall a sovereign debt crisis. On Tuesday, our total national debt has increased over $15.7 trillion. Clearly, the problem we passed the BCA to address is getting worse, not better. And as our own military leaders have acknowledged again and again, our debt and deficits are the largest national security threat that our nation actually faces. Backpedaling on the Budget Control Act as suggested here is irresponsible. We need to be building on the fiscal foundations in order to provide for our children's future and the future of the military. We spent a lot of hours here talking about how much we can't afford to cut back military spending, and not nearly enough time talking about how to prepare for the military of the future. And in my opinion, the smart military budget of the future emphasizes our National Guard. It's proven more than a ready reserve in the sands of Iraq and the mountains of Afghanistan. The National Guard is an affordable strategic asset of a unique capability. The rising cost to our military is probably personnel. The National Guard will help reduce that cost 4 to 1, and I yield back.
Gentlelady reserves with 15 seconds. Gentleman from California is recognized.
Reserve.
Gentleman reserves.
Mr. Chairman, how much time do I have remaining?
The gentlelady has 15 seconds.
15 seconds. Let me yield the 15 seconds to the gentleman from New York.
Gentleman from New York
in
is
15
recognized.
seconds, I'll simply say that this amendment does the least we can do. We should go with the Budget Control Act. The other side of the aisle says we haven't passed the budget. This is the effective budget. And the fact of the matter is we have doubled military spending exclusive of Afghanistan and Iraq in 10 years. We ought to start reducing it now.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from California is recognized.
And how much time do I have, Mr. Chairman?
Gentleman has 1 minute and 15 seconds.
I yield myself the balance of the time.
Gentleman recognized for the balance of his time.
Mr. Chairman, I wish we were wrong, and I would hope that they are right, that we could continue to cut defense, cut it to the bone, cut it to the marrow, and we could just live one big happy paradisical life. But history shows that that isn't the way things work. And as Reagan said, it's important to have peace through strength. You remember before he was elected, when President Carter tried to deal with the hostage situation in Iran, our helicopters couldn't even fly across the desert. We've cut back the military so far, we had a hollow military. There's a lot of talk about General Eisenhower and President Eisenhower and the thing he said, beware of the military-industrial complex. He also said we have to have a very strong military because if we don't, someone will take advantage of us. We have to be so strong that they're afraid to attack us for fear of annihilation. I was talking to one of our leading military leaders just in a few months ago. Mr. Smith was in the meeting also. At the end of the meeting, he looked at me and he said, in my 37 years, I've never seen a time more dangerous. If we are right and we go through with all these cuts and hollow out our military, we're talking about cutting $100 billion a year for the next 10 years.
Gentleman's time has expired. All time having expired, the question is...
Time.
Wish you had something to yield back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from California. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not
recorded vote.
The gentlelady seeks a recorded vote. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentlelady from California will be postponed. Sorry about that. It is now in order to consider amendment number 45, printed in House Report 112-485. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition?
To support the amendment.
Does the gentleman have an amendment at the desk?
I do have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 45, printed in House Report number 112-485, offered by Mr. Gilbert of Texas.
Pursuant to House Resolution 661, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gomer, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I would yield 1 minute to Mr. Ritchell from Virginia.
The gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 1 minute.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I rise in strong support of the amendment and thank my colleagues, Mr. Landry, Mr. Gomert, and Mr. Goodlatte, for their hard work and their strong leadership on this important issue. I also want to thank the chairman for incorporating the original Landry bill in the underlying bill, the Right to Habeas Corpus Act. Now, the amendment before us this evening provides absolute clarity that every American has full protection under and access to the great writ of habeas corpus. Specifically, it requires that a detained person has the ability to file an application for habeas corpus relief in an appropriate district court no later than 30 days after the date at which the person was placed in military custody. Further, it requires that the administration, current and those to follow, that Congress is notified within 48 hours of a person having been detained under the AUMF in the United States. The 30-day access to habeas corpus and the 48-hour reporting requirements strengthen the underlying bill. They strengthen liberty. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Washington, for purposes, seeks recognition.
To claim the time in opposition.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I yield myself 1 minute.
Gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
3 quick points. First of all, habeas has already been guaranteed by the Constitution. There were those who accused last year's defense bill of having stripped habeas, but it didn't. So guaranteeing habeas does nothing to further protect the rights of individuals. That's first of all. Second of all, the bill itself, the way it is worded, which is to say nothing shall be construed to deny the availability of the writ of habeas corpus or deny any constitutional rights in a court ordained or established by or under Article 3 of the Constitution for any person who is lawfully in the United States when detained. It has been ruled constitutional to place people in military custody, to hold them indefinitely. This amendment does not eliminate the right to hold people indefinitely or place them in military custody. It does not do what the next amendment, my amendment, actually does, which is protects those rights. Third, I find it interesting that the offerers of this amendment think that it does. They think that basically this will protect from indefinite detention and from military custody any person lawfully in the United States. At the same time, they are arguing, I'll yield myself an additional 15 seconds.
Gentleman is recognized.
At the same time, they are arguing that our amendment, that clearly does that for everybody, is giving rights to terrorists. So what they are doing here, by their own admission, and I disagree with that argument, but by their own argument, they are perfectly okay with giving rights to terrorists as long as they're lawfully in the United States.
Gentleman's time has expired.
If they're not, that's a big problem. I'll expand upon that argument later. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This time I would yield 1 minute to a friend from Louisiana, also a co-sponsor of this bill, as Mr. Ritchell was, Mr. Landry, for 1 minute.
The gentleman from Louisiana is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Chairman, I rise as a proud member of the Tea Party. I oppose the debt ceiling. I oppose some of the CRs. I oppose our involvement in Libya. I'm a strict constructionist when it comes to the Constitution, and when I joined this body, I raised my hand to God and swore to uphold the Constitution and protect it from all threats, both foreign and domestic. I am a veteran. With this oath, my duty to protect our citizens' liberties is matched by my duty to protect their lives. That is exactly what the text of this bill, when combined with this amendment, does. It ensures that every American has access to our courts and ensures that they will not be indefinitely detained. Equally important, our amendment does not harm our armed forces' ability to protect this nation. Unfortunately, some in this body choose to believe that our soil here is not a battlefield in a war of terror. They want to treat the al-Qaeda cell in Seattle differently or better than the al-Qaeda cell in Yemen. To yield to these members to adopt their view does nothing to protect the liberties of our citizens. It only harms their safety.
Gentleman's time has expired.
For that reason, I urge them to adopt this amendment and oppose this amendment.
Gentleman from Washington.
To again point out that he wants to protect the al-Qaeda cell here as long as they're lawfully in the U.S. It doesn't make any sense. I'll yield a minute and 45 seconds to the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Amash.
Thank you. The gentleman from Michigan is recognized for 1 minute and 45 seconds.
Thank you. I have a tremendous amount of respect for my colleagues, Mr. Gomert and Mr. Landry and Mr. Ridgell. I think their amendment is very well intentioned, and they care very deeply about this issue. I've had many conversations with them about it. But the first part of the amendment does nothing. It says the AUMF does not deny habeas corpus or any constitutional rights for any person who is detained in the United States who is otherwise entitled to the availability of habeas corpus or such constitutional rights. In other words, if you have constitutional rights, you have constitutional rights. The second part of the amendment might be harmful. It says persons detained by the military are allowed to file a habeas petition not later than 30 days after the date on which such person is placed in military custody. First, the Constitution already gives detainees the power to file a habeas at the moment they are detained. So at best, the 30-day window does nothing, and at worst, it can be read to allow the government to deny habeas for 29 days or to deny habeas if the petitioner didn't file until after 30 days. So I'd like to express my disapproval of the amendment. I'll yield back.
Yields back. Gentleman continues reserved. Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I would like to recognize another co-sponsor of this amendment, gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Duncan, for 40 seconds.
Gentleman from South Carolina is recognized for 40 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate Mr. Amash's efforts to protect liberty. Let us be clear. There should be no ambiguity when the constitutional rights of U.S. citizens are at risk. The fear that Americans have over indefinite detention is well-founded. We have the obligation and now the opportunity to be crystal clear in this language, and I believe that this amendment moves this NDAA in the right direction of protecting these cherished constitutional rights, and I urge support. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Left, Mr. Chair.
Gentleman from Washington has 2.5 minutes remaining.
I will yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Nadler.
Gentleman from New York is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment asserts that it intends to protect the right of habeas corpus, which is to say the right to get into court. But the problem is not habeas. It's not the right to get into court. That is granted by the Constitution. The problem is what you can assert once you get into court. It says nothing about that. It says nothing about the circumstances in which individuals might actually be subject to military detention when arrested within the territorial United States. And it's actually dangerous. It narrows constitutional rights because it narrows the scope of the statutory habeas corpus protection to individuals lawfully in the United States when detained as opposed to those detained in the United States. So someone with questionable immigration status might not have any habeas rights under this amendment. And secondly, as Mr. Amash pointed out, by saying that you can file it not later than 30 days, it could be read to say that unlike current law where you can file habeas the moment you're detained, you have to wait 30 days, or you might not be able to file after 30 days. So it's an affirmatively dangerous amendment. It narrows the rights of habeas corpus, and it doesn't do anything to protect the real problem here, which is not habeas. That was never the problem. The real problem is the right of detention, that when you get into court through habeas and the court says you have no rights because indefinite detention is permitted. That's the problem we ought to be dealing with. This amendment doesn't deal with it, and it makes the habeas arguably more difficult and more narrow. And therefore, this amendment, if we value due process and if we value liberty, this amendment should be defeated. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman continues to reserve. Gentleman from Texas.
Well, at this time we will reserve. I do have the right to close. Is that correct?
You just have one more speaker.
The gentleman from Washington
I'll be the
has
last
the right to close.
Okay. Then I will yield myself the balance of our time.
Gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
This amendment is pure and simply a smokescreen. The proponents of this amendment believe that the President of the United States should have the power to indefinitely detain people in the U.S. They believe that these people should be placed in military custody. And I wish we could have that debate, and we will to some extent on the next amendment. This was offered as a smokescreen to give people who want to claim that civil liberties are their top priority some place to hide. It doesn't protect any rights whatsoever. It was pure and simply offered as a smokescreen. Let's have the debate on the next amendment about whether or not the President of the United States should have this extraordinary amount of power to indefinitely detain or place in military custody or military tribunals people captured or detained within the United States. I, as I will explain in the next amendment, don't believe that that extraordinary amount of power is necessary to keep us safe. I think it is an amazing amount of power to give a president over the individual freedom, to give the government the power to take away someone's individual freedom without the due process rights that have been developed in our Constitution and our court system. And I oppose that.
Time has expired.
This amendment doesn't change that. Vote it down. Let's have the real debate on the next one.
Gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
It's recognized for 2.5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, the issue is here, do you want to fix possible problems with the authorization of uniformed military force back in 2001 when all of the co-sponsors were not even here, and possibly the NDAA, or do you want to extend new rights that are not constitutionally required? Because those of us that have sponsored this amendment want to fix the possible problem of inappropriate detention. That's why this amendment was offered. I take particular affront because I do not question the motivation of Mr. Smith. I know Mr. Amash. We've stood alone on too many bills together. I know their intent is good. This is not a smoke screen. This is intended to fix a problem. In the underlying bill that came before the floor, it has a fix for habeas corpus in paragraph A. I added the provision that gets us to where we were before the AUMF. That's what I wanted to fix, not as a smoke screen, but what this does is say, if you had these constitutional rights before the AUMF, you've still got them now, and nothing in the AUMF, nothing in the former NDAA, nothing in the new NDAA can change that. You have those rights. And I understand we don't have CARE supporting this amendment as they do the following proposed amendment, but listen, what this would do if the subsequent amendment wins instead of this one, you are giving rights to people illegally in this country, for example, who are foreign terrorists that sneak their way in here and kill people, to rights that immigrants who are undocumented don't have. People say, gee, we have a right to an Article III court. This Congress has the right to never create an Article III court. No one in America has a right to an Article III court. This Congress has the right under Article I, Section 8 to create or not create inferior courts. I'm glad we created them. I would say we should if we didn't. But the right is to go back to where we were before the AUMF. That's what this amendment does, and we appreciate the support of Heritage and the Wall Street Journal in saying that the subsequent amendment is not the way to go, extending additional rights. Let's fix the problem, and this amendment does that.
The gentleman's time has expired. All time having expired, I yield back. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. Opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to.
I would ask for a recorded vote.
Gentleman seeks a recorded vote. Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas will be postponed. Mr. Smith? Okay. It is now in order to consider number 46, printed in House Report 112-485. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 46, printed in House Report number 112-485, offered by Mr. Smith of Washington.
Pursuant to House Resolution 661, the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Smith, and a member opposed, each will control 5 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield myself 1 minute.
The gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
First of all, the previous amendment doesn't say anything about pre-2001. As Mr. Amash correctly stated, it says if you have constitutional rights, you have them. It doesn't say anything about restoring them prior to 2001. It doesn't address the issue, and I apologize. I do not question Mr. Gomert's motives. I suspect that's what he wanted to do. That's not what his amendment does. If you want to protect the rights of people in this country, then you need to support this amendment, the Smith Amendment. And this is a very important debate. Back in 2001, we passed the authorization for the use of military force. Post 9/11, it made sense, I think, to be careful, to give the President the power he needed to protect us. But what we've learned in the last 10 years is one power that he does not need is the power to indefinitely detain or place in military custody people here in the United States. Our justice system works. The Department of Justice works. The FBI works. They have arrested, convicted, and locked up over 400 terrorists, gotten all kinds of actionable intelligence out of them. This is I'll yield myself an additional 15 seconds. This is an extraordinary amount of power to give the President, to give the government the power to take away an individual's rights and lock them up with nothing more than one quick court hearing, without the due process rights protected in our Constitution. It's not needed. This is our opportunity to repeal it. I reserve the balance of my time.
Reserves. For purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
Mr. Chairman, I claim the time in opposition to the amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I would yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Landry.
The gentleman from Louisiana is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Chairman, this amendment turns the global fight on terror into a CSI investigation. On its face, the supporters would say exactly. But let's see what the results. The mission of those who fight the war on terror now is how do we prevent acts of terror from inflicting billions of dollars of damages to save lives? You see, our law enforcement and prosecutorial system in this country is by nature an after-the-fact determination, meaning we rarely have the ability to arrest a potential murderer until after he commits the crime. The deterrent is the length of the sentence for the murderer that deters people from trying to harm or kill another. That's not the case in terrorism. We set the punishment level to the severity to determine the crime, but the level under terrorism, they know no level. What deters a person from driving a plane into a building? So how does passing this amendment protect the furtherance of that crime? Or will we simply be satisfied with investigating after the fact?
Gentleman from Washington.
I would point out that our Justice Department has arrested countless terrorists before they act by discovering their plots and stopping them. That is what they're designed to do, and it's what they've done quite effectively. I yield 1.5 minutes to the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Amash.
The gentleman from Michigan is recognized for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The frightening thing here is that the government is claiming the power under the Afghanistan Authorization for Use of Military Force as a justification for entering American homes to grab people, indefinitely detain them, and not give them a charge in a trial. That's the frightening thing. That's the thing that the Smith-Amash Amendment fixes. It's the only amendment that does it. I sometimes hear this strange argument that the Constitution applies only to citizens, not persons. If you read the 5th and 14th Amendment, it applies to persons. Those are the amendments that provide for due process. James Madison said the Constitution applies to persons. And logic dictates that the Constitution applies to persons. It applies to non-citizens. Is the government allowed to make non-citizens worship a state religion? Is the government allowed to take non-citizens' property without compensation? Can the government quarter troops in non-citizens' homes? Can the government conduct unreasonable searches and seizures on non-citizens' houses? Of course not. That's ridiculous. Everybody here understands that's ridiculous. No one disputes that all persons in the U.S. are covered by the Constitution. HASC claims to protect persons. The House Armed Services Committee and the NDAA claims to protect persons with respect to habeas. The Gohmert Amendment claims to protect persons, not citizens. And the Smith-Amash Amendment protects persons. It's a phony argument. The Smith-Amash Amendment is the only amendment that will protect citizens. And we have a very clear choice here. If we don't allow this amendment,
yield the gentleman additional 15 seconds.
Gentleman's recognized for 15 seconds.
We have a very clear choice here. A federal court has ruled Section 1021 in the NDAA unconstitutional. There is one amendment that fixes it. Will you do it? And if you don't, how will you explain it to your constituents? Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would yield 1 minute to the distinguished member of the committee, Mr. West.
Gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in opposition to this amendment. I find it very interesting that back in 1942, when there were German Nazi saboteurs that were captured off the coast of Long Island, that they were prosecuted in a military commission. One of them was sentenced to 30 years imprisonment. Others were sentenced to death. And I understand that this is a different type of battlefield that we're on, the 21st century battlefield. We're all on this battlefield. No one would have ever thought that Major Malik Nadal Hassan would stand in Fort Hood, Texas, and shoot 43 Americans, and 13 of those would be killed. I find that we have to understand that we are at a war. We are not in a police action. We cannot look to guarantee to those who would seek to harm us the constitutional rights that are granted to Americans. If we extend that to them, then we are starting to say that this war on terror, now it's a criminal action. And I find it very interesting that a sponsor of this amendment is the Council for American Islamic Relations, that is a co-conspirator, unindicted co-conspirator for the largest terrorist financing
time has expired.
act here. So I say that we will not support this amendment.
Gentleman yield?
I don't have any time to yield.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Washington is recognized.
I'd point out that only members of Congress are allowed to sponsor amendments. Nobody outside of that has sponsored this. And I would yield 1 minute to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Nadler.
Gentleman from New York is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, last year I argued in opposition to Sections 1021 and 1022 of the NDAA that they went far beyond the AUMF to suggest that the President has the authority to detain U.S. citizens indefinitely without charge. This amendment prohibits the detention without charge of any person arrested or detained in the United States and is the first step toward restoring due process. It's a good first step, but its scope is limited to U.S. soil and to the present AUMF. We should do more. That's why I've introduced the No Detention Without Charge Act, which would not only prohibit detention without charge of people arrested in the United States, but would also prohibit the detention of any person anywhere, indefinitely, except to the extent permitted by the Constitution and the law of war, and it would restore a meaningful right of action for detainees to challenge the legality of their detention. The notion that the United States should conduct itself according to the Constitution and the law of war should not be controversial. Smith-Amish takes the first step, and I have proposed the next, towards affirming our values and securing our liberty. If we are going to address indefinite detention, we must do so directly. I urge my colleagues to support the Smith-Amish amendment and to sign on as co-sponsors of my bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Texas.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I would yield 1 minute to the distinguished gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gomer.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, we hear repeatedly people say persons are entitled to their constitutional rights, and yes, they are. When I was in the Army for 4 years, I was entitled to constitutional rights, but I had no right to freedom of speech. I had no right to freedom of assembly. There were a lot of people in the military that would rather not assemble at 5 a.m. in the morning, but you don't have that constitutional right. Same way with immigrants. Immigrants do not have all of the rights under the Constitution that others do. What we're saying is that people who are terrorists and kill Americans on American soil should not have more rights than an immigrant who is here peaceably, but who is subject to the laws and subject to detention without going to an Article III court. There are constitutional rights, yes, but not everyone under the Constitution has the same rights. Ask somebody in the military. So I implore my colleagues, please do not give foreign terrorists on our soil more rights than our own
Gentleman's
military
time has expired.
under the Constitution. I yield back.
Gentleman from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. I would ask unanimous consent to submit to the record a letter from retired JAG officers explaining the difference between the Uniform Code and military justice.
The general statement will be covered by General Leave.
Thank you. I'll have that submitted. And with that, I'll yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Griffith.
The gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, the problem is that folks want to always talk about the terrorists, and absolutely we all should be concerned about the terrorists. But how about the citizens of the United States who have to worry about now being arrested when they don't know what it is they've done wrong? In the court case that set aside 1021 just yesterday, the court points out that they asked, can you tell me what it means to be substantially support associated forces? The United States government answers, I'm not in a position to give specific examples. The court says, give me one. And the gentleman says, representing the government, I'm not in a position to give one specific example. The problem is that we have citizens who may be caught up unintentionally by this bill or by 1021. We must protect the citizens of the United States from an overreaching bill that has been ruled unconstitutional. And what else is interesting is the definitions aren't in 1021. The court points out in that case that in 18 U.S.C. 2339 and 2339A, there are definitions. We need definitions. We cannot leave liberty to inference.
Gentleman from Texas.
Mr. Chairman, I reserve the balance of our time.
Gentleman's reserves.
Could I inquire as to how much time each side has left?
Gentleman from Washington's time has expired.
Okay.
Gentleman from Texas.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield myself the balance of the time. And Mr. Chairman, at this point in the record under general leave, I would insert a record to Chairman McKeon from former Attorney General Meese, former Attorney General Mukasey, former Secretary Chertoff, and others on this topic. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate Mr. Smith's earlier acknowledgement that last year's NDAA did not take away the rights of Americans. The Gohmert Amendment, which we debated, I think removes all doubt and actually adds some extra procedural safeguards to make sure that Americans' rights are absolutely protected. To his credit, Mr. Smith's amendment, as he admits, does change the law from what it's been. Not only the past 11 years, but it changes the law from what it's been basically since World War II. And my suggestion is that we all ought to be very careful about changing the law. With the exception of Fort Hood and the Little Rock shooting, we have gone 11 years without a successful terrorist attack here in the United States. There are a lot of reasons for that, but part of the reason is the legal framework that has given the tools to the military, the intelligence community, and law enforcement that have all made that possible. Mr. Smith's amendment changes that. And the biggest way it changes it is that it automatically gives foreigners constitutional rights that we all have thought of as belonging to Americans. So the second that a foreign terrorist, member of al-Qaeda, sets foot on U.S. soil, he is told you have the right to remain silent, you have the right to an attorney. If you can't afford one, one will be provided to you. Now that is a significant change. The gentleman from Washington says, well, look, our criminal justice system works all the time, and it is true. We can prosecute people. But the key here, as Mr. Landry said, is not just prosecuting people after they've committed their act or after their bomb has failed to blow up, if we're lucky. The point is to prevent those attacks. And that means you have to get the information from them. And that means if you say you have the right to remain silent, it is going to be harder to get that information from them. And we're talking about foreigners here. American citizens absolutely have the right to contest their detention. No American citizen will ever be tried in a military commission. Any American citizen has the right to contest his detention. To keep us safe, this amendment must be
Gentleman's
rejected.
time has expired. The question is, on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Washington.